Nothing stops this train.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is the best option for educating your children, and why is it definitely not the public school system? Today we're here to talk about it.
Is it because teachers are sexual predators? I don't know. Find out.
What a way to start.
Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, all four of us are fathers of young children. We are all Christian men, and we take discipleship very seriously, as we should all. And so we're also, for those of you who don't know, we're not Amish. We don't believe in segregating ourselves completely from the world, right? We've all been public schooled. Like, we can, go around. I can tell you myself, like, I was in public school until third grade, fourth, fifth, and sixth. I was homeschooled. I went to Christian private school, seventh, eighth, and ninth, public school for 1 year in the States of high school, back to private or boarding school private boarding school for 2 years. So I've basically done the full gamut of what is available. The other guys here, I don't know, Tim, what was your background? Did you do?
I was in private schools up to 8th grade, not like the swanky, high-end academies.
Did you have a
but just
uniform?
We did. We had uniforms.
Then you were swanky.
You sound like my wife, and it's like, it was an older Mustang.
What
you had a
car
Mustang.
did your dad drive?
Be honest.
Be honest.
So if you're here and you're listening and you want to find out if you should be sending your children to homeschool, public school, private school, this is the conversation for you, because public school, statistically, this is not even debatable anymore at this point, guys. I don't know how much you looked into this, but the data, it's brutal. The data between homeschool, SAT statistics, and public school, off the charts differentials. The acceptance rates for prestigious colleges, Ivy League colleges, they're now looking for homeschool kids. And so, as a parent, as a dad, I am so excited about this conversation because I don't think enough of us are having it in this culture today. And let me just, out the gate say a thing. So there are extenuating circumstances here, okay? So the things that we're going to say are not tone deaf, in that I do understand there is a reality where public school, there's a really good argument for public school if the home environment is not safe, is not good, is not better. So there are different, and then private school is financially,
right. I think the financial aspect of it is much more weighing on people because, obviously I know my parents sacrificed a lot lifestyle wise to send me and my kids, or me and my siblings to.
Yeah. Who's got kids in private school right now? Anybody?
Well, mine aren't school age, so.
No? Okay. I had my kids in private school. I had Avery in private school for 2 years. $10,000 a year. Oh, yeah. $10,000 a year. That's what I was paying for.
And I was telling that
tuition
to Brittany just the other day, that I said, honey, for us, we're really passionate about homeschool, and I'm going to talk all about why that is. But I'm not opposed to private education. It's just on a single income, I don't think we're going to be able to do it. So that ship is just not an option for us.
Yeah,
so
it's not an option.
I'm going to be so passionate about homeschool, but I do wish I was making high six figures and could send all three of my children to private school, because the statistics do show that private education is really great. So if you
yes and no.
There's a lot of conflating variables there that are really hard to pick out, because if you just in general decided, hey, look at all the people who can afford to send their kids, to $10,000-$20,000 a year private schools,
there's other positive factors that are parallel.
And that's the main criticism that public schools make when they try to, debunk all of the obviously better outcomes that come from private schools and charter schools. It's like, oh, well, it's not like a random sample. It's like, well, when they do random samples for charter schools, they still come out quite a bit better than your garbage public institution.
So before we move into this, I shared a little bit of mine, Tim, you said you went to private school and then you went to public, right?
Yeah.
And then what about you, Nick? What was your...
I was in public school
Josh.
my whole life.
So Josh is
everybody point and laugh at the poor kid.
Public school kid. By the way,
that was me.
If you want to see a sample of Josh's, adolescence in the public school system, he was there was a documentary film. What was that movie? There was a movie that we'll put it in the show notes if he won't copy it here. Well, actually, even better, we'll cut the clip in, Josh, right here. right, this is why public school is bad. And then
Enter
cut to
here.
Josh
And
as a child.
Anderson, I'm excited to hear your feedback throughout this conversation because, so for my story, I was in public school for like the first grade, and then I was homeschooled all the way up to private school and then Liberty University. So I have very much all 8 grades of homeschool experience and then the private school experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So-
interesting. I think that sorry, before we
No,
get
go,
into
Josh.
that, go ahead and
Yeah.
you do. Okay. So what's interesting about my experience, I think going up in public school, there was different various, levels of schooling, I guess, depending on your neighborhood. I remember the first school that I went to up through 4th grade was a school that maybe was not as highly rated. And I remember going into a school in maybe a more uppity part of town. We rented in an area, and I went into a better rated school. That's how good my education was. I was at a better rated school, and it was a completely different experience. And one of the things that I noticed for me, just as a personal experience, is there was definitely more conflict. Not in the education, but amongst the other kids. In the
Right, because you're in this
schools,
lightly
there was
supervised thunderdome of children. You are though,
It
like
really
the amount
was.
of there was a significant cohort, particularly of young women, who actually became like less depressed with themselves during the school closures following 2020 because they weren't being relentlessly bullied in public schools. Like the idea that that's somehow a desirable environment for socialization is one of the flimsiest arguments for that I've ever heard.
So let's structure this a little bit. All right. So here's kind of what how I kind of want to think about this is like, and I'll full disclosure. So we are currently living in Germany. I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, and they're currently in a DoD school, which was a decision that we made because my kids are still young enough grades. We are my girls are in 3rd, 1st, and then my son is going to start kindergarten. So what we're looking at is, we put them into the DoD school, and we've been trying to figure out how to, like, the biggest frustration we've been having has been with not so much with the curriculum or the training, but we can talk about that, has been with exactly what you're talking about, Tim. It's been the other kids. It's been the differences in family dynamics, family to family in a community that there's just too many variables to kind of look at this young age. And so like, I think it would be helpful to talk about this in like, because I don't think it's as clear as like one is better than the other at each stage. I think I kind of look at this.
That's funny. I totally disagree.
I'm not saying that it's not. I mean, you could make an argument that that's the case, but like, I think one of the things that if we look at for like the young, like the earlier, like elementary school grades, right? The thing that we've looked at is we want our kids to have a solid foundation and limit exposure to certain ideas and concepts, not even because we want to be the ones to have those conversations, just because we want to make sure that all of these things are in place and they've had a little bit more exposure. And if we have the ability to not have them exposed to certain topics before, 4th grade, as if that's asking a lot,
For sure.
Right.
then, why not do that? And you just can't do that in a public school environment, at least from what I've seen. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that kids don't really actually encounter certain aspects of sexuality until they're about 8 years old, right? Like it's not even a concept for them. Like the statistics
They
or
don't
studies
have
that
any
have been
framework.
done, and there's no way that they can even make sense of it. So, and the kinds of trauma that occur with kids, like when they're exposed to like porn or exposed to molestation or really terrifying traumatic events before they even understand what's going on. Think about that's how it screws up their entire outlook, and that's more of the extreme level. Now let's factor in that, you can have boys be girls and girls be boys before 8 years old. That concept is like, I don't, the world doesn't make sense to me. Right.
Yeah.
And so the idea, the legislation that's, that I think DeSantis passed in Florida to say, look, let's keep this type of content out of the school system. It was the Don't Say Gay bill, which didn't actually say gay. It was the idea that, look, let's not like shelter everybody from this, but let's do it in an appropriate time to where that can be conceptualized, where it can be understood.
Yeah, and I'm not even talking about it. I mean, like, this is my thing is, even from the administration standpoint in the school stuff, like, there's still, ways we have some ability to influence that, at least within the DoD school system that I'm in. But, like, I'm talking about the kids. Like, there are kids in elementary school, like, boys with long, colored hair that are wearing, that are dressing effeminate and that are identifying as something. I'm talking about in like 1 grade ahead of my daughter in like fourth, last year it was third grade, but this year, fourth grade, like, oh, well, there's this kid in my other class and, he wears pink and girly things. And how does that, and this is then my daughter naturally has questions. It's one thing when it's a grown man and I can be like, that person is disturbed and doesn't understand, what's going on. When it's another young kid, that makes it a little more. And when they don't see the teachers correcting it, when there's
or
not
affirming it,
or affirm, and they see them affirming it or going into it, like, that's the kind of stuff, or the kids are talking about it because they're seeing it on YouTube. Like, the amount first, second, or I don't say first, but really, like, second and third grade, these kids are on YouTube constantly. Other kids outside of my house, they're watching stuff. They're, and they're talking about it with my kids. And, like, that's the stuff that I can't, that I don't have the ability to be, to have purview on all of the time, to see what they're being exposed to.
And that's really, I think, the critical point for me is, why are we assenting to sending our kids into a organically created society that purposely draws from segments of our broader society that we would never willingly tolerate to have our children associating with, but suddenly when it's the wingnuts children, suddenly now that's okay. The person who's negligent enough to put their kid in front of a screen for 6 hours a day so that they can just sit there and parrot back all that stuff that they have no cognitive capacity or bandwidth to truly process. Why would you do that? Why would you give up so much control over the most precious thing that you have?
Right.
The most precious thing.
Well, and we've allowed our school systems to really become daycares, and essentially the need with inflation, with the financial stability of the world right now, it requires maybe both parents to work in, depending on the lifestyle choices that you're making. And so it makes sense to go into free schooling and let your kids go to free schooling, because it helps provide time to the parents when both parents are working. And I understand that concept, but at the same time, the amount that we're giving up in that process it can be critical. Also, one of the things is just critical. The philosophy. Yeah. And the philosophy of education, right? With the way that we allow there's so much money being pumped in to the education system, and the standards are getting lowered, and the money is increasing, and the output is degrading. So it's like the more money we put into education, the less quality of education our children are getting. And I think it's a fundamentally philosophical problem, because we've eliminated the need for wonder and enchantment within education. In fact, in the way that you have classical school system is essentially it utilizes the philosophy of truth, goodness, and beauty, all pointing to the divine nature. It really is educating kids to help them tangibly encounter the resurrected Christ, and encounter the world of God.
What does that look like? I'm
truth,
not really...
goodness, and beauty. Yeah, so you have different reasons. Like for classical education, it's like kind of a twin process of the way it's appropriated, it's like the redemption of the senses and also the cultivation of a moral imagination, meaning that truth, goodness, and beauty is ultimately about drawing students to encounter God through the incorporation of the entire cosmos of a transformative life, the life, death, and resurrection of Christ.
I know. I get the high level concept. I guess what I'm asking is like, kids need to be able to know how to add two numbers together. What is that?
Oh, so that's an interesting concept, right? So the way that you interact with this particular aspect of education is through philosophy, history, logic, and a lot of the classical systems that aren't really taught, like rhetoric and music.
Yeah,
also, they aren't really necessarily taught in school systems. And so the way that you can utilize the truth, goodness, and beauty aspects of classical education is to enchant and to encourage wonder. And I'll get into more. I want to save that because I want to get more into the actual philosophical aspects of education, because I don't know if we're there yet.
I think the struggle that people have, though, is extremely practical, right? They say, how am I supposed to teach my kids? Oh, I'm going to pull them out of public school. They're not going to advance quick enough in reading. They're not going to advance quick enough in math, all of that stuff.
Because no, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really the practical struggle. Obviously there's the physical constraints like Josh was talking about of the finances and the time and all that stuff. But I think the other one is a genuine question of like, how do I even do that?
Yeah, and I just want to put this out there just so people understand this too, and just so you understand that we get this. So my wife is a very smart woman. She's an electrical engineer, incredibly competent, and the prospect of homeschooling is overwhelming to her to think about, like when we talked about these things, right? Because different is like we all fear the unknown, and so like thinking about like why I don't, and it's when it's your own children, you don't want to screw them up, so you're like, I get one go at this. So I want to say that just to say that, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not, I don't think I'm the smartest person in the world, or maybe I'm like this is intimidating to people at every level, and even like, I don't even say this, even me, like I'm an educator by profession, and like training children is a different animal. Like, it's a different animal. But here's something I would say. This is something that was like an eye opener for me. I went to a music concert at my daughter's school where they did a little demonstration of a play, like or they sang some songs and whatnot, and they did it with I go in there and I see this poster on the wall, and it's the chromatic scale, do re mi fa sol la ti do, right? And it's one of those a week. So we were 4 weeks into the school year, and they had only gotten to like do re mi fa, like they'd gotten to fa, and I was like, I'm sorry, you're spending 8 weeks to learn, or 9 weeks, to learn the chromatic scale. Like, I
feel like there was a movie that hammered that out pretty.
I literally,
pretty
I know.
Efficiently.
I'm like, there's a song. There's like literally one song in like an afternoon. So I literally took Avery home at the end of the day. Yeah, I know, right? Cut to Julie Andrews, Salzburg, Austria. Let's go. Anyway, so I take Avery home, and not only do I teach her that scale, I also teach her, the actual pentatonic scale on top of that on the piano, which, she's learning. And we did that in an hour. And like, that's the thing that people forget, is that when you put your kid in a classroom with 15 to 20 other kids, you can only go at the pace of the slowest person there.
They're learning,
and the other thing is that
of the time. Yeah.
People think that like, oh, well, the whole time that my kid is at school, they're learning. I don't know what I'm going to do with my kid for that many hours a day. And I'm like, your kid's not learning for that many hours a day.
Right,
okay?
Right. They don't need the amount of time that we all wasted in school just waiting for everybody else, the dumbest kid, to catch up. Like, I think of all the things I could have done as a kid if I hadn't. Yeah.
Well, let me jump in here for a second, because I want to address that, because I was homeschooled for a long time. For the parent that's listening, that's like, yeah, I hear that argument. I don't feel like I'm good. I'm equipped. Like, I'm not a teacher. I don't know what I'm doing. Guys, it's the 21st century. We have the internet and technology. The curricular offerings for homeschool solutions will literally do all of the heavy lifting for you. And so to your point, Josh, where it's you're not constrained, which is one of the primary homeschool arguments. You're not constrained by your slowest learner. You're able to offer a one-to-one learning experience with each one of your children. And then in my experience, back to the time thing, guys, I had the coolest childhood. I was done by noon every day.
Same.
We had the most fun with all of our friends doing all the adventures and the field trips and the whatever it was. And when I was in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I was like, I connected the dots really quickly that I was like, oh, wait, you're telling me if I wake up at 8 o'clock and I eat my breakfast really quick and I, bang out my homework, I can go play for the rest of the day with my buddy down the street. Like, oh my gosh, it was amazing. And by the way, I was still able to take AP calculus. Like, it wasn't like I was behind. I was still ahead.
Right. And that's
because you didn't need to sit there in a classroom for all that extra time while everybody else did their work.
Yeah, and every student's different. Like, that's something I explained about when I was talking, like, we were talking about this, and it's like, certain kids pick up on things very quickly. So, like, if your kid picks up on reading real fast, you don't need to spend that time working on that anymore. What is the standard that they're expected to meet in that year? You have a choice. You can choose to move past that standard and continue to grow quicker, or you can move on to another subject and invest that time into subjects that they struggle with. And so you end up with a more well-rounded student and you have free time. Like, because I know that there are people who think, well, if they do that, then I got to move on to the next thing. No, you don't. No, you don't. Like, your third grader doesn't need to know calculus. Okay? Right. Can they multiply? You're fine. Like, move, like, go travel, go do something, like, go expose them to, like, go do more. And that's what I think people are missing out on.
Well, when I was a kid, because I had many friends who the standard for a kid who was quicker or like more advanced or picking up on things faster, they would just bump you up a grade. I had tons of friends, which is a terrible strategy.
Horrible.
Because what it did, because I skipped third grade, and all it did was it put me a year behind. It took me a year and a half to catch back up, right? And then all of a sudden, okay, now I'm bored again because you didn't actually solve the pacing problem. You're still shoving me in a classroom for the same amount of time that I don't need every
And now you're the youngest person in the class, because that's
which
what happened
had
to me.
other problems, right?
Thank you for answering that, because that was definitely a question that my wife and I have had, and we struggle with, because one of our sons is both of our sons are incredibly intelligent. One of them we've considered moving up a grade, and we struggle with the implications of what that would do.
Don't do it, man.
Don't.
Yeah.
Don't
okay.
do it.
Well,
that's happened to me. I missed a year of school. Luckily, when my brother had an accident where we had to we spent 6 months in hospitals. And so I basically missed a year of school, which put me back on level. But my life was hell until that happened, because I went from being the youngest kid, because I'm an August birthday. So I went from being like the youngest, smallest kid because so much life changes in those time frames. There's a very big difference between a third grader and a fourth grader.
There were kids in my class 2 years older than me, because a lot of times parents who want their kids to excel in sports, they'll purposely hold them back a year so that they'll be bigger, more developed to do those other things, which I don't know. I don't have any opinions on the merits of that, but it creates the opposite thing. So you have to get into these massive gaps, and you don't really have peers in that situation.
And it's a horrible experience. And it luckily it rectified itself for me before I entered high school. But but I would strongly advise against it.
So it sounds to me like what we're saying is if the fear of homeschooling is that you're afraid that your children will fall behind, that shouldn't be an issue in today's age. We have YouTube, we have ChatGPT, we have other curriculum that will take care of all of that heavy lifting. If there's a concern about the social environment, there's all kinds of homeschooling meetups where the kids get to interact multiple times a week and even be taught by other parents and other subjects. So a lot of this
not
stuff
in the Thunderdome.
Right, not in the Thunderdome. And it's interesting too. What I've my younger brother was homeschooled, and what was interesting about that is the amount of social interaction that he had throughout the week was significant. And the new friends that our families made with homeschooling kids, and there was always the stigma growing up of like, oh my gosh, this kid was homeschooled because they were weird.
They were
But
weird.
Coming
And
from
that's-
They were
That
back
was a
then.
real
But coming
thing
from-
because
That was real.
But coming
Yeah,
from my perspective, coming from somebody that was in public school that got bullied, because look at me, then going to
Sorry, cut that
homeschool. Yeah,
You got to do it.
I got a
put it in
reference in
there.
IMDb.
Yeah, you
guys.
gotta do
Don't
it.
be jealous.
Put it in the subtitles.
So gosh, it threw me off. So the coming from.
I'm sorry.
Coming from being bullied, or even when I wasn't bullied as much, and I was part of groups in public school, that I had a group of friends, and then going to some of my younger brother's hangouts where there was a wide span of grades that worked together, and I thought, man, they're very weird, they're odd. But really, what was odd to me was just kind kids that were not corrupted, that were always looking to put the others down. And that was odd to me. Like, what? Like, you seem so nerdy,
Josh,
instead of saying you're a douchebag, rather than, you think you're so bad to the bone. Like, who says that? Right. But that was the kind of things, the differences in the way that they said things, so I don't know. I think that was an interesting experience. And I don't think the stigma, that often follows with all of it really exists or is valid.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, but again, though, the people who are public or who were homeschooling when we were kids were somewhere on, like, towards the Amish spectrum, right? That's why they were weird, right? It wasn't because homeschooling made them weird. It was because they were kind of weird families who were making a proactive choice to isolate themselves and their family from society to a significant degree.
Yeah.
I literally
It's
saw
not you,
that.
kid. It's your parents.
So like that is because like I hated the homeschool stigma of, because I was homeschooled for a huge amount of time. So it's like it's a 50 in my generation, the millennial generation, if you were homeschooled, my joke was it's a 50-50 shot that you end up normal. And what I saw was there was a 50% divide of the families that homeschooled and isolated versus the families that homeschooled and did not isolate was almost the exclusive difference. And it's the homeschool kids that were isolated all the way up until college. Bless their hearts, they definitely were a little bit weird. It does not mean they did not succeed in life, because I have plenty of stories still of them all succeeding.
Yeah, and most of those,
lives. Yeah,
right.
But yeah,
most of those weird kids that I knew, like 10 years into adulthood, normal. So.
Also remember this, that our society, even for our generation, was a lot more homogenous depending on where you lived. I'll preface that. It was a lot more homogenous. What was socially acceptable? Like, there were things you had to worry about. I mean, it was the 90s. I was in elementary school in like the 90s and high school in the 2000s. But in the 90s, you had things you had to worry about for sure. But like, those things were
Drugs,
like
mostly.
people doing bad things. But there was no question about what bad things are and what good things are.
Correct.
That's the fundamental difference.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's become the bigger hurdle. And I think there's a lot of people who are our age and younger who are looking at this and going like, well, I turned out fine. I went to public school, and it's not the same. But yeah, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just talking on the bad things because we got to this earlier, but I kind of want to double click on it because, it does help summarize this homeschool, private school, public school conversation, to the story of your daughter. Like, the things that they are getting exposed to, like, we skipped over that, but I want to sit on that for a minute because in my line of work, average age of hardcore pornography exposure is now 8 years old. The school bus is the number one place people are exposed. Sexual abuse in minors is going off the charts. They are now sharing explicit sexualized images of each other through sexting and texting. AI is now auto-generating stuff, and you have this weird thing of minors now being able to distribute pornographic material to other minors, and then they're getting charged as adults. And then, like, on top of that, there's the broken homes, the breakdown of the family, and the breakdown of the family and the broken homes leads to additional abuse taking place, and those abused children are now in. And so, like, I think more than anything else, like, don't pass go. The amount of things that my child would be exposed to at an inappropriately early age going to public school for me is a non-starter. To such an extent, I told Brittany, I said, I'm so passionate about this, honey. And I would actually challenge the men listening to this, because you'll have never heard this challenge before. But I said, honey, I'm so passionate about this. I would stop working. You could be the breadwinner.
100%.
And I would happily, and by the way, I would love it, because I'm getting my doctorate in education right now. So I am semi-allowed to talk about this kind of stuff. But I would educate my kids and have a blast doing it.
Yeah. And can I agree. Let me jump in on that too, because really all the things that we're talking about, all the, bad aspects of public school, the positives, it's not really about emphasizing that kids are taught by their parents specifically. The fundamental problem that we're dealing with is that at one time, school took place as part of a community of shared values, and part of those shared values actually respected the sovereignty of the authority of parents, right? And so all of the things we're talking about, whether it's education or the children's interaction with other kids, most of those problems and what we're trying to corral back in is having all those things actually take place under the authority of parents, which is why, even like the bullying in schools, well, that's happening because they're outside of any clear authority structure. So when I call it a lightly supervised Thunderdome, that's what I mean. I mean, there's no recognized authority structure. Whereas when you're in a community of other parents and their children, the interactions between those children are going to be naturally mediated by the proximity
sanctioned
of their
violence.
Parents. Yeah,
well, it's interesting.
Exactly. That doesn't mean you intervene every time there's conflict. Sometimes it's like
you let it roll out.
Well, here's something that I would say, and I'd put out to just the parents, right, that have kids in public school right now. The birthday parties that your kids get invited to, observe the parents and the kids as they interact in the birthday party, and you'll start to see the things and the disrespectful behaviors that your kid has brought home in these other families. And that's not a burn on these families, because it's just passed down.
Yeah,
it's passed down family to family.
Most
family,
parents aren't
grade
very good,
to grade
man.
to grade. Sure. Okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to be a little bit charitable because there might be people from my kids' school district that'll watch this. I love you guys.
We
but
love
get your
you.
kids under control.
But be better.
So I'm just saying,
Don't
like,
get bitter.
and the
Get
same
better.
way for me too, right? Like, so I think that the difficulty is, it really comes down to the philosophy of education. And if I could take like maybe 2 minutes to kind of explain what I mean by this, is we've stopped encouraging education at its fundamental basis to be something that is wonder, that is something that is enchantment, that leads us to see that we are just microcosms in this macrocosmic world of creation. Oftentimes we have, every year, for instance, we have kindergartners that go into their first day of school with awe and wonder and a desire to learn. And every year we have 12th graders graduating that are disenchanted relativists that have no idea what truth is. And so how do we get from that process where they're enchanted and they have wonder to the extent where they don't know what anything is? There's no objective truth. There's no moral objective values. And the problem with that is that that's the society that this society produces that in children. And then they go into college to get further indoctrinated by their professors that tell them this is relative. Everything is relative. There is no truth. Christianity is bad. And they end up walking away from any kind of belief system that they spent 18 years in a home, because the reality is parents did not instill a sense of truth,
Even
goodness,
if
and
they-
beauty, of ethical aspects into their children's lives.
Even if they did, Josh, this is something that people fundamentally miss all the time. So like I grew up as a pastor's kid and a missionary kid. And if you grew up in church and you know any pastor's kids or missionary kids, then you know that most of them are crazy. And the reason they're crazy is because they were isolated in most cases, right? The difference between, and it's just like what Nick said, like 6 one way, half a dozen the other. What's the difference? Well, fundamentally, this is what it comes down to. If I raise my children that this is the way, and I see it already in my third grader, where she is already starting to notice the dissonance between some of the things that she sees in the world and some of the things that she sees at home. Here's what we owe our children. You have to put them around other people who share your values and convictions so that your child can see it borne out in other people, because that is how they are going to connect. And it can't just be any other people. It has to be people that they respect. It has to be people that are worthy of respect, not just from them, but in society. Well, how do they see that? Well,
Right.
they need to see that parent interact with other parents. You know, I remember as a young man watching my dad interact with other adults and seeing other adults give my dad deference, like, and ask my dad questions. Man, why does another adult come to my dad for guidance? What's that about? Or this guy who's really smart and knows this thing also teaches his kids the same thing that, you know, I'm taught. Like, it became very clear to me around that time frame, third, fourth grade, that there was a difference between some people and others. And what we're failing at a lot of times as Christians in our modern society, I don't even say we're failing. It's just harder because we were raised in a track, in a system where all my teachers, second, third, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, every single one of my teachers went to my church. They went to my church. So
Right. And that's that shared community.
correct. And so like there was no questioning about what I was going to receive there or whether or not they were going to protect, you know, and defend right. And this gets back to our conversation about government. And we've talked about this before. Promote evil, punish and limit. I did it again. I did it
Did it
again.
again.
Promote
Dude,
good,
you have a problem.
punish evil. I'm lisdexic. Promote good, punish evil. We have like, you guys have heard of, you guys have heard of
We were
cut
here.
flower. Did you never hear that before?
Bro, that's
Oh, man.
hilarious.
Anyway, have you ever heard this concept of like the cut flower syndrome or cut flower syndrome? Do you know about this? So
No.
like a cut flower is like, it's like this. So you cut the flower is beautiful. You put it in the vase and its beauty and its radiance lingers for a little while, right? But it doesn't persist because it's not connected to the root, right? Logical, it seems like, right? This is where our society is at. The structure of our society is a cut flower. It looks like the same thing you grew up with. It smells like the same thing you grew up. Maybe it's a little different. It looks a little faded. It looks, well, why? Because it's no longer connected to the root that it was. The flower, the thing that you recognize, was connected to a root. What was that root? A fundamental, you know, parallel understanding of how the world works. And because of that, people like we didn't have to worry about it as much because it was anchored in something and there was accountability. That's what you were talking about, Tim, earlier on. And so like that's really what this comes down to for me is like I don't think you can make the argument for, certainly not for elementary school age kids. I just do not see how you can make the argument to justify public school if you're like based on these risks, like the things that you're talking about, Nick. Like that's 100% true. Literally the other day, walking home from school, and a third grader is talking about sex right next to like over there.
Right.
My wife overhears it and is like, "Where did you hear? What is this?" Like third grade. Like no, you know. So yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I mean, just one thing to that end too that I'm really I was thinking about this the other day. So there are people listening to this. Back to the thing we mentioned earlier about the nuances of this conversation. There are plenty of realities where you will have to send your children to public school. So
Yeah.
this entire conversation so far is going to sound like we are dunking on public school, and we are. But here's
Facts.
what I want to say. If I can envision a world tomorrow where I have to flip a switch and my children have to go to public school. And here's all that this actually means. It means that your parenting game has to multiply by 100. Yes. So it's not like it's off the table. But what it means is that, to Josh's point about his third grader having to, in a room with another third grader talking about sex, if Josh's parent game isn't at 100, he wouldn't have heard that happened. He wouldn't have been able to ask his daughter, well, what do you know about that? What did you think about that? What did you hear about that? Oh, by the way, what does the Bible say about that? Do you even know what sex is? Enter thesextalk.com. We'll get to that later.
And you're hearing this from children who are subject to degenerate influences, who are not something you should emulate. That's really drawing that societal division between people is super important, because when you scoop all of these children up into the same place for 8 hours, they're inclined to think they're the same. Yep. Right? And it's up to parents to make the distinction. No, we have a calling.
And that's not a popular opinion, by the way.
Yeah.
That is not.
Oh, no. It's
divisive.
We are different. And to, the last thing I'm going to say about that is just like, it's okay to internalize that. And yes, it means you have more work to do, but that's what happens when you decided you wanted to have a kid. There's right. No backseat option. Sorry, right. You don't get one.
Right. Otherwise, you're doing all the work of feeding and housing someone else's kid, because you're not really...
Exactly. And if you're listening to this right now and your kid is in public school, that's okay. You don't have to freak out right now, although I can make a case why you should send your kid to private or homeschool your children. But if you change nothing, you must be an engaged. There's no, your kid comes home, how was school today? Good. Oh, no. We're going to debrief for 30 to 45 minutes on every day. And it doesn't have to be this weird controlling experience, but as an engaged parent, you need to know what worldviews your child was exposed to that are antithetical to your worldviews, and then you have to adjust them.
Yes.
The end.
I was going to say, being a parent of kids in public school, we go to great lengths to prepare them for what they will be exposed to, right? One of the things that we've done after seeing a cool episode or a podcast of the, the Naked Gospel from Proven Man, they had a person on the show who published a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And it was a phenomenal book that we ended up going through. And it basically talks at the child's level that is intended to be in an interaction between parents and kids to say, look, there are some times that you're going to be exposed to bad pictures, and this is this is what, a bad picture means and stuff like that. And also going into expressing like what God's intention is for beauty and sexuality and stuff. But one of the things that helps with that is, when my kids get home from school, I can always ask them, hey, did you see any bad pictures today? Did anybody show you any bad pictures today? And we've established...
hate that that's necessary.
I hate that it's necessary, but we've established that there is an absolutely no shame and no judgment in any aspect of that. Even if they were to intentionally look for it, seek it out, there's never any shame to say, look, let me help you. I want you to be at a point where when you do something bad, I'm talking to my kids, when you're doing something bad, instead of having the mindset of, man, I really screwed up, I don't want to tell my dad. I want there to be a mindset of, man, I really screwed up, I need to talk to my dad. Right?
Amen.
Like establishing that kind of, relationship with that is, I think, important. And also from the aspect of theology and apologetics, and this is what I'll end on here. William Lane Craig in his book Reasonable Faith, or somewhere else, he wrote that, we as parents, we're sending our kids out into battle every day without any kind of armor, shielding, or weapon to fight or defend their worldview. So if you're not actively engaging in talking about theology or apologetics or defenses of the faith beyond just the simple, well, I know it's true because I have that experience, which is a great valid testimony, right? But if you don't have basic understanding of apologetics of why we believe what we believe, we're sending our kids out into battle where they're being attacked and they don't have any way to defend themselves.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
Yeah,
Josh,
but I want to
go ahead.
I want to challenge Anderson on this for a second.
Go for it.
Because you describe all that stuff, and I just get internally absolutely steamed. Right, listening to you describe all of the things that you're sending your kids into. That like I don't want to send my kids into battle. Right, you have no idea how much I would sacrifice materially to close off entirely that avenue for my kids to be exposed to those kinds of things in the first place. Why do you? What I realize that's a harsh question, but why?
It doesn't matter at what age. Maybe you could prevent them initially.
Yeah.
But the idea is, you send the Spartans trained their children for war.
Yeah,
right.
Josh.
It's not something that you can avoid. Maybe you can shelter, or not necessarily. I don't want to use that as a negative connotation because I don't think it is. But protecting your kids from exposure for a period of time until they're ready is ideal. But ultimately, they're going to be exposed. They're going to be attacked. They're going to be challenged.
100%, Josh. Hey, Josh, listen.
That's
agreed.
my answer.
Agreed. No, I agree. But here's the thing. This is what I struggle with too. We're talking about the age. Again, and we're doing it now. I'm not. This is not a judgment of where we're at. What I'm saying is children are not equipped. And when I say children, I'm talking about pre-middle school, right? Like that age group. They're not equipped to navigate that. In other words, just the exposure to those things can drastically negatively impact them.
Yeah.
We should not, if possible, and I want to emphasize this.
If possible.
You could, if you're born in a war zone. I grew up in a third world country in a communist party. There are children there. I know many of my friends who grew up in horrible, adverse conditions. God's grace covers a multitude of sins.
Amen.
Okay, so I want to put that out there to say this. I'm not, but what I want us to think about is this. I don't have a problem with sending a high schooler to a public school, even a senior middle schooler if it comes down to it. But when I look at the developmental ages of the fundamental understanding of the way the universe is, I didn't even send my school asked me if they could have a group of people come and talk to my children about abuse. And I was like, no,
Of course not.
you can't talk to my kid about abuse. What are you going to say? What is it that you're going to say that to them? I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to have any say in that. I don't know what that conversation is going to entail. I don't want you to frame and shape what constitutes their fundamental understanding of agency. First of all, my child is a child. They're not entitled to anything apart from what I give them.
But they do that because there are kids that are abused. Back to the
100%.
crappy environment
And that's
that they're
why
in.
you have that conflict where public schools and teachers are trying to be co-equal, not subordinate to parents. And
Which is why
so
I'm glad that they sent a permission slip home so I could take my kids out of that conversation. But then we had to have that conversation. Josh, what I'm telling you is I feel the same way. What you're saying, should we prepare our children to see things I'll give you an example that's not school. My children have probably seen movies that maybe many parents of children my age would say I'm insane, especially as a pastor, for letting my children watch. I don't have a problem with letting my children see violence, death, or bad language. Why? Because bad language, they don't know what these words mean. They mean, it's literally, they could be saying, Baba Ganoush. It literally means nothing to them. Okay. They can ask me what it means. I don't have to tell them. But I can tell them it's a bad word. We don't say it. And if you want to know more about it, I'll tell you when you're older. But it doesn't fundamentally shift or change anything in the way that they understand the world or the universe. Death and violence is a fundamental part of our existence, and their dad works in the business of death and violence. So if daddy dies, I want them to understand that daddy died fighting evil, and that's part of life. So that can happen. Two, but the things that I don't let my kids see is mature, and when I say mature, anything romantic relationship oriented. Like, I do not want my children processing something beyond, like, especially from an outside narrative, especially like teenage drama type stuff. I don't let my girls watch anything that has like mature relational themes, because that's because that stuff is where they slip in these.
They will adopt those paradigms.
Correct, because
Yes.
they'll see that as, oh, that's how that works. And I'll give you, and I'm done after this, so I'm not by the time, I'll give you an example. I was talking about, my daughter asked me, Avery asked me last night how me and Danelle met. And I said at a restaurant. It was an Irish pub, but we said a restaurant.
Funny because I know this story.
I know you guys. One day I'll share it with all of
It's a
you.
great
and the rest of the
story.
internet. It's a great story. But I met my wife at an Irish pub, but I told I told my daughter we met at a restaurant, which was a restaurant, not Cole and Truth.
They serve food.
And she said, well, that's where, she's like, I knew it. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, that's where romance happens. High school and restaurants.
And then
Oh
you
my
said,
gosh.
and what'd
Right.
you do next? What'd you do?
I said, high school? What do you mean?
What do you mean high
And
school?
she said, and she was like, well, in like all of the shows and stuff, like all the high school kids are always like, they've got girlfriends and boyfriends, or like they're talking about their relationships. So what cartoon shows that she has seen, or that I, through other movies, like that is her, like what I want to zoom in here is this, is my daughter's understanding of where romance takes place. She has gleaned from that. It is,
Right.
now I've corrected, and, we had conversation to like, to move the other direction.
But absent that, she would have showed up on her first day of high school
Yes.
and be like, "Give me a
Where's
boyfriend."
my boyfriend? 100%.
Does that
Okay.
assigned in homeroom, or do I
So
raise
Josh,
that in later?
yeah. So before I hand it to Nick, Josh, what I'm saying is like, I agree with what your premise is, that we equip our children for what they're exposed to. So in other words, what I'm saying is if you have to put your kids into public school, or if your kids are in public school, then yes, you have to equip them and prepare them. But should we promote that as the ideal? Personally, I don't think so. I think for younger children, if we have the ability to say, like, there's nothing wrong with saying, just because your life may not be ideal. It may not. And it's not fair. And I'm sorry. But there's an ideal and there's a not ideal. Right? And we have to have a paradigm. Like, and I'm not saying that for you, Josh, but like, I mean, like in general, like people, we can't be afraid to say, like, if we had a choice, what's like, is there a good, better, best?
I think parents should reconsider.
Is that fair? I don't know. Is that
Yeah.
fair? I don't
No,
know.
it is. And I just think parents should reconsider just what having a choice means. What aren't you willing to sacrifice? Like, ask yourself, is it impossible? Or are there other things I'm not willing to give up? And are there maybe
Yeah.
good reasons not to give those things
If you're a
up?
single mom, or a single dad,
Oh yeah.
and you got kids,
Right.
yeah, you don't
That's
have
probably
choices.
just not
I
flat
get
out
it.
not an option. Yeah.
It's
But
not-
there,
it's not an
you
option.
guys also have to realize. So, like, I agree and I disagree, and I see where Anderson was coming from, and I think you guys might have missed him a little bit, because there's a little bit too much idealism. So the book he's referring to, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, that is not a prescriptive book that you only do with your children if they go to public school.
Oh,
and
no,
I
that's
know
great.
that
The
you're
book's
not
great.
saying
Yeah.
that. What I'm simply
great.
saying is, we unfortunately live in a world, to your story example is so perfect, where and this kind of, Tim, is maybe a little bit to you here, where it's like, unfortunately, I am going to have to talk to my son at an age much earlier than I am comfortable with about the definition of pornography. This is just one
Yeah.
example. This is just
And
one
I get
example.
that. I do.
And so, encircling this
Not ideal.
conversation that we're having. Yes. So what I'm saying is, encircling this conversation that we're having is that I want you to remember something if you're listening to this, and for you guys as well. It is not if, but when your children will be exposed to whatever it is. Now, we don't have to be
Yes.
talking about porn. We could be talking about abuse, objectification,
Yep.
like whatever the sin is, whatever the brokenness is. It is not if, but when. And here is the challenge. You know your children. I don't know your children, and I will not prescribe. But you have one job. One job. Is your child prepared for when that when happens? because it is not if, it is when. So pick whatever the context is and whatever the narrative is. The first time they're exposed to pornography, the first time they hear the word sex, the first time they see a bully or experience a bully, the first time they feel shame. Is your child, in their brain, is a switch going to go, I know I can go talk to dad about this? Because the when has arrived and they were ready for it because you prepared your children, whatever the age, whatever the context.
And to put a finer point on that, I'm specifically talking about to what extent do you allow the channels of exposure? Because I do agree with Hughes that the exposure is hugely damaging, even if you've done all of that groundwork. And I believe that most people should consider sacrificing more to minimize those pathways if they can. But the fact is, most people, and I get that for some people it's literally just not an option. I'm not passing judgments based on specific scenarios, but I know how much I would give up. And it's a lot. It is a lot. Like you would have to be cutting into my ability to provide other important things for my kids before I start to actually balance giving such toxic influences ready access to my kids.
Josh, can I jump in real quick and make a point while we're on this topic before you go?
Of course, brother. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think that is important to acknowledge, because I don't disagree with what you guys are saying. And so let me just kind of put that up front. What I think is also important is when we raise our children in a godly home and we lead them to Christ and they have their own relationship with Jesus, like the Holy Spirit is with them even at that age. Like that's that kind of conviction is there.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, I would be convicted for the things that I knew I did wrong. Right? Like that relationship with God was real. You know, while kids were in the back of the bus looking at each other's butts, I was leading people to Christ. Thank you very much.
Amen.
You know what I mean? So I'm saying,
like,
so what I'm saying
every
is,
time.
What I'm saying is, let's also not take out the factor of, you know, bringing up the child in the ways that they should go. And like, God's got your kids. Like,
Amen.
And trusting your kids, you know, trusting your God to be able to also watch over your kids, be praying for
remember,
your kids
are covered by your faithfulness, right? So if that's not motivating to you as a parent,
right? I'm just saying that's a factor I think that we probably should
for sure.
not
You're
forget.
right, Josh. That's a really good point. And I didn't want to zoom over. I didn't want to pass over your statement on, you know, how important it is to cultivate, you know, a shame-free, well, not a shame-free, but to cultivate you as a guide and a person to help a person navigate that, not as the source of shame. Like the source of shame or guilt or conviction is the obvious answer. But for young children, they're still learning and understanding that. So it really manifests as shame for them. That's going to be because they did something wrong, but like that we would be a source of, you know, guidance and safety in that. I think that was very powerful, and I don't want to overlook that. I do want to say that I lost it. Sorry, I had it a minute ago. But I was going to. Nick, what did you say a minute ago? What were you talking about before Josh came in?
I mean, just to Anderson's point, I don't exactly remember, but I do think that's really important to note. I know I have had a lot of friends that went to public school, and they advocate for the resiliency of their faith that they find in public school.
I agree.
So back to, you know, reiterating the nuance of this conversation, but the if but when, it is like we live in a world where your child's going to be exposed to the most horrendous things, and it should challenge the way you orient your life. To Tim's point, like if you are such a prude that you are not willing to take the 30 minutes to figure out how to apply a safe filter on your home router and make sure your children don't have unlocked devices, you should be ashamed of yourself. If you're a parent listening to this, if you haven't done that, literally, you should be ashamed.
You may as well hand them the porn yourself.
Pause this, do it, come back.
Yeah, and then come back. Here's what I was going to say. This is what reminded me of. And this is kind of just looking at where we're at. I think this kind of bow ties everything. When we talk about educating our children, what are we really talking about here? What we're talking about is the fundamental obligation that we have to disciple our families, our children. That's what we are fundamentally talking about. A classical education, as Josh brought it, wonder, pointing people to an understanding of, a classical education. We're looking at, logic and grammar and rhetoric and these types of things. All of that is a way of we're giving a child bones on which, like, a framework for how to view the world. And what's cool about that is that what we understand is that how we view the world tells us who God is. And so that's fundamentally what we're talking about. Discipleship, your job is to disciple your kid. Your kid must be discipled. And here's the trend that we've seen. We've offloaded this, and I won't even say we've offloaded. We were bait and switched.
Yes.
There was a time when our children were being discipled by community members in the course of their education, where aspects of their education were being tied to the core understanding that what does the world around us tell us about who we are, who God is, and what's our place in the world. Slowly, we've drifted away from that, but we've been told all along that this is the way that we do this. So it's not entirely our faults in that regard. That's not the world we live in anymore. And so our responsibility is to disciple our children. And so the question I would simply, and this gets to your obligation as a parent, if you're sending your kid to public school, your obligation to disciple your child does not change. So kind of what we're getting at here is your focus. I had somebody ask me this the other day about, and I'm not saying this critically, so if you hear this and you're the person I'm referring to, don't take this negatively, but hey, we need to do a baptism class for kids because my kid wants to get baptized and I want to make sure that they understand the gospel. And I was like, okay, well then we don't need to do a baptism class. Apparently I need to do a discipleship training course because that's the problem.
That's something. Yeah.
Right? The problem is not that, like, I don't need to do a baptism class. Like, does the kid have a parent? Yes. Like,
why aren't you telling your children about baptism? Why are you not discipling your own child?
If you cannot disciple your child, how are you discipling other people? How is that even? Is it happening? I'll go ahead and spoil this. I already know the answer. It's not. It's not happening. Which means that you are a child in the faith, and that's not okay. Because again, good, better, best. It's biblical, folks. This is not my opinion. You are called to meat, not milk. You are called to disciple and baptize. If you can't do that for your own child, how can you do that for other people? It's okay if you don't know how to. It's okay if you're scared. It's okay if it's overwhelming. That's what people like me are here for. That's what people who are further down the road than you in certain areas, people who eat meat, that's what they're there for. Like, you have support, you have help, and there's no judgment in that. That's why I say, like, if that's you, if you're the guy or girl I'm speaking to about that, like, I don't want you to take offense to that. Just come talk to me. I'll help you. But what I want you to understand is that that exposes something bigger about our society, about the church, and about this. And this education question is it's a branch of that same river, is that we have a lot of people who claim to be Christians who do not understand their fundamental mandate to make disciples, and they haven't been equipped, and they don't know what that even means. And so, that's kind of where I see this going. So how do we do that better? That's really what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And I mean, in doing it better, one thing I want to say, maybe to lighten the mood a little bit and stop dunking on people, is if you're still here, you rock. I am so excited to teach and disciple my children. And disciple in the faith context, I like that word. It works well there. But equally just teach and instruct. I don't know about you guys, but maybe it's the doctor of education in me, but I am already nerding out on the things I can and will get to teach my children. I kid you not, in the Liberto Library, which I am currently putting together, I have already compiled, yes, this is how much of a nerd I am, the chronological list of books that my children will read at different ages as they age. that
We'll
I
link
will
that in the show
read,
notes.
Yeah,
that I will,
dude, put up a Goodreads list with your list.
I'll do my best, but it's still
Well,
not done
we
yet.
can contribute
What
a
I'm
list, 'cause
saying is,
there's a
yeah,
lot.
we'll put something together because I have a 3-year-old. So like the nice thing is our third child is on the way. I'm sure I'll pat myself on the back a little bit. I love parenting so much that I'm already putting this thing together and I'm excited about it. And so, finance, the things I'm into, economics, building with your hands, the different ethics and
The
philosophies,
things you
the
get
books.
to show them.
Oh my gosh!
So
like
great.
the my favorite thing, because I love books, is like I'm going through my library and I'm reflecting and I'm like, okay, what are the top books that shaped me? And it's like, ooh, they have to read that, and ooh, they have to read that, and
Guys.
then okay, I'm throwing this book away. This one's trash.
Dude.
But like whatever it is, I love this journey, and so like
Right.
this can be fun for everybody
fun.
listening, and it is fun, and I'm excited about it.
Hey, Josh, do your kids read yet?
Yes.
Okay.
So
we have readers.
Go ahead.
Go
Yes.
ahead. I was
So
going to
let
say
me give
Wing
you an
Feather
example.
Saga. We're dead in
Dude,
Wing Feather Saga.
is awesome.
If you're not,
so
listen.
cool.
If this isn't sponsored, we'll get an affiliate link. And Andrew, if you hear this, man,
right.
dude, I'm like at the end of the third book right now, and it's killing me. But I've never read a book that has such profound lessons for children on such deep and like real concepts that are brought down at such a young age. If you guys haven't read it, for the two
So
of you,
good. To that example, let me give you an example of how we can take literature and build that into our children's upbringing, lessons learned. Oftentimes storytelling is one of the most effective ways to teach. And so there was a couple weeks ago, one of my sons had some behavioral issues and he was just really not acting right. He was being mean. He was bullying. He was putting others down, and he was having a hard time controlling the impulse thoughts, right? And just being mean. And so after going through the standard list of disciplines, and I saw that there wasn't that much of a difference that wasn't getting through to him, what I did is I made him read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And so I took that book, which has a particular character named Eustace, he's just a punk. He's just a punk kid who is mean. He's a bully. His interactions with Reepicheep are hilarious and everything. But in that story, he becomes a dragon, and then Aslan peels away the scales and he becomes a new creation. And you see this redemption arc of this bully kid who is self-centered, who is selfish, that is only thinking about himself, go through this arc of understanding that it is a painful thing to change, but I'm so glad that change came. And so being able to watch my son go through this arc of like, oh, I don't want to be a Eustace, was so effective. And so that was really, really exciting there. Let me pause real quick.
A prophet's without honor in his own home. I mean, that's what the best thing about books is that you have ready-made examples of not you reinforcing the things that they're seeing from you on a day-to-day basis. Like,
right.
And folks, even simple things like I literally have the Beginner's Bible audiobook that I got from Audible, and I have Amazon Echo Dots in every room in my house.
We did the same thing.
And it reads the Bible story, the Beginner's Bible, on loop to my children every night, and has done so their entire lives. Like, my children know every basic Bible story, and I haven't had to do jack.
Our Sunday school teachers come to me and be like, "You're such a great father," but our kids knew the story of Sarah before we even taught it to them. This is amazing. Yeah. Like, yeah, well,
you're welcome. Listen, Alexa will disciple your children.
That's right.
You don't.
AI.
That's to the point that Nick was making. We have the internet. We have resources. We have things out there. But yeah, let me. I can't. I struggle, and perhaps maybe we'll do a different segment where we'll do like a 15-minute or 20-minute short to go into more of the classical education aspects of it and how I see that can be effective, and really going on to the point of the truth, goodness, and beauty that I talked about. But I think that might generally take us in a different direction than discipling our children. So I wanted to give space for that.
Right, to be thematically appropriate. I used to joke, how we've gotten so ingrained in this idea that school is this almost divinely ordained part of children's lives. And you'd think that, when God created the world, there was Adam and Eve and Mrs. Brooks, the kindergarten teacher, over in there, And so for a long time, I would joke like, well, teachers now, there's no teachers in the Garden of Eden. And then somebody pointed out that I was wrong.
What?
Mrs. Brooks?
There was a teacher in the Garden of Eden.
Just kidding. There was, you're right. And it was the serpent.
Get there faster, Nick.
Bad.
Oh, okay, I'm there.
Yeah. So
That's funny.
If the snake ever talks to you, do not talk back and walk away.
That's right. Just smile and nod and wait for your mom and dad to come pick you up.
In my family, my dad is the best, worst joker ever. That is like his favorite joke to tell to women, and it's the most not PG. It's like, he's like, now we're always on a hike somewhere. He's like, now ladies, if you see a snake, don't talk to it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't say things like that.
Harsh.
It's
but fair.
hilarious. It's hilarious.
That's funny. Do we want to end it here, or?
Yeah, I think it's a
this
good
has
spot.
been another episode of the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. We really are engaging in your comments. We want to hear what you have to say. If you have a defense for public
Looking at you,
school, we want
grizzled
to hear
millennial.
it. If you want to talk about private school, homeschool, if you have a story you want to share, we actually really are excited about engaging with our listeners and our audience. So share this, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right.